Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Williams, for that very informative presentation. So I just want to go over a few things with regard to for the Q&A so that everybody understands exactly how we do it. So we do not take questions directly from the chat. What we do is we ask everyone to raise their hand. If you're not familiar how to do that, you go to the button second from the right at the bottom of the Zoom window called Reactions. You click on that, and then you click on the Raise Hand function. I will, when I call on you, I will unmute you and ask you to state where you're from and to ask your question. And we just ask that all questions are brief and on topic. So with that, we're gonna go ahead and open it up to Steve. Please state where you're from and ask your question.
Steve from Rockaway. Good morning, Dr. Williams. Thank you so much. Nice to see you again.
Good morning.
That troubling information about fish and preventing stroke. Is there data about increased problems from the toxins that are accumulated in fish as far as, I don't know, liver cancer or pancreatic or brain problems or any other parts in the body? It seems like the recommendations twisted your arm to approve it based on a reduction in stroke. And there are a lot of other things going on. That's my question.
Very well said. And I would say I would just add to your list. I'm really bad at actresses' names. The one who was in Titanic.
I know it. Kate Winslet.
Kate Winslet. Kate Winslet. Thank you. If you Google her name, you'll see that there was somewhere around the middle of last year, there was a documentary that she narrated, and she may have produced it or something. Somebody who must have had, it was just so very well done. And they are showing it for free. You don't have to buy it. Everyone should look at that. If they think that pesco-vegetarian is a good idea, it turns out that you could have a really good discussion about which is worse for the planet. Eating cows and raising pigs versus taking fish out of the ocean. And so they do point out the chemical issues and the infection issues, disease spreading, no question that there are a lot more than just cardiovascular disease and particularly cerebrovascular disease at issue when you're talking about replacing red meat with fish. So I'm sure the cows liked that recommendation, but from the other point of view, whole food plant-based would be better. So, and this is a big deal if I could talk about it for another 30 seconds or so, because we have so many people who have misinterpreted the Mediterranean diet data. They think that a Mediterranean diet is good. And I get into this fight sort of verbally with my friends and colleagues in cardiology, recommending a Mediterranean diet. Still not good for the planet. But if you just look at the basics of cardiovascular disease, what you end up with is three different things that you must control, okay? Cholesterol, inflammation, and TMAO. Now, there are some fish that actually have TMAO, but eating TMAO and developing TMAO in your own microbiome in your GI tract seem to be different things, okay? But there are no, I hate to say something gross, but carcasses of deceased animals that you can eat without increasing your LDL cholesterol and your inflammation level measured by high sensitivity C-reactive protein. And if you look at the data from Paul Ritker, published just a couple months ago in Lancet, lowering inflammation is a completely missed opportunity in cardiology. And he's talking about colchicine and methotrexate and canakinumab and all these different ways of lowering CRP. I'm just saying, whole food plant-based diet. David Jenkins published that with Portfolio Diet in 2003. And Benita Shah had a great randomized trial, Evade CAD, done at NYU, showing you want to lower CRP, you cut the animal products out, do a whole food plant-based diet. So anyway, I would say that I could argue very long and hard about not eating fish. But if you want to talk about eating cows versus eating fish, there are some advantages, not much, and not as a cardiologist. I'd say much more if I was a neurologist, I'd be a little more excited about it.
So on that topic, can you just describe how you were, I don't know if this was your word, so it may not have been, how you were forced to have fish in your recommendation?
Oh, so yeah, it's really easy. So when you're on a guideline committee, okay, first thing you do is everybody gets their own assignment. Of course, they gave me nutrition, all right? And so you're supposed to review from that point on all of the world's literature. You have, in the hypertension guidelines, we use doctor evidence. We used a different company this time, but this is kind of what I do. So I had most of the evidence already. And then you put together what your recommendations are. And then, most important point, when you walk into the room with your recommendations, you drop your ego at the door because you're going to take a pummeling. Okay. And each one of when people say that these guidelines are wrong, I can tell you these guidelines are very, very carefully done. And so when I come in there with my colleagues, Dr. Esselstyn, they will say, or Dean Ornish, Esselstyn was not randomized. Ornish was randomized, but it was small. If it's not a study with at least 50 people in each group, the Institute of Medicine says you can't use that to make a recommendation. I can quote it in the summary below, which I did, okay, that there's a lot of evidence that doesn't make it to the level where you can use it to make a specific recommendation. But here's the evidence. And the fact is very clear that fish compared to red meat decreases stroke, at least in that one trial. Now, you could argue with it that there is a Harvard publication from Nurses Health and Health Professional Follow-Up Study where they said processed red meat kills faster. Here's the difference in mortality if you just replace the red meat with blank. And all of the blanks were on the left side. That is, poultry was better. Legumes were better. Soy was the best. Fish actually was 6% higher. Didn't reach statistical significance. But in that particular data set, which is doctors and nurses followed for 30 years, fish actually had a trend toward increasing mortality compared to red meat. So I don't want to give fish a pass at all. And then I saw that documentary where I was talking about I would never eat a fish, but it's so easy for me. I'm allergic to fish. So if you want to see my face swell up, try a white fish.
Okay, thank you for that. And do people who eating a whole food plant-based diet still have heart attacks and strokes? And if so, why is that?
So it's interesting. People on a whole food plant-based diet. The question is, life or not? And number one, and if there's one you'll hear Gene Braunwald at Harvard talk about, it's the lifelong exposure to LDL cholesterol. And his colleague Paul Rickard would say, well, don't forget about the inflammation. And then the people at Cleveland Clinic will say, don't forget about the TMAO. Okay, but his point is well taken. If people start eating an animal product diet in utero, meaning that their mother is eating it, okay, and then they continue that until they, something happens to their LDL cholesterol at a cardiology meeting at age 47, and they realize, oh my gosh, I should be vegan, which is what happened to me. Well, that area under my lifetime curve was suddenly improved, but I still had a lifetime of exposure. And, very few people know much about my personal story, but I basically grew up on the South Side, and I did mention having to move every year because we were poor. Well, we got even poorer when my mom went back to school, quit her job and went back to school. Then, the food stamps and not running. I mean, this was terrible. But one thing she learned by going back to school, she had a professor who said, if you eat meat, you're going to die faster. And so she came home and made us vegetarians. Well, except that the vegetarians, were we were still eating dairy and didn't realize that the cholesterol differences were not that much. And then, of course, growing up, becoming a cardiologist, I'm paying attention to the American Heart Association diet. So I was eating chicken and fish, no skin, not fried, not realizing that the inflammation and the LDL were just the same as red meat. I'm sure my colon cancer risk plummeted when I started that. But cardiovascular disease, I was still at risk and didn't know it. But then none of the stuff I've been talking about today wasn't published back then. So bottom line is that there really are no safe animal products for human consumption. And that's a hard truth for people to realize. But if you look at the Harvard data on risk, cardiovascular risk, cancer risk, overall mortality, they're all different. And fish and poultry are safer than dairy, which is safer than red meat, which is safer than eggs, which is safer than processed red meat. But there are no safe animal products.
So to follow up on something that you just said, that how long would it take for a person who comes to become whole food plant-based later in life until they have the same health outcomes as somebody who's been lifelong, or is that impossible to achieve? Hopefully.
Right. So your point's well taken. That is, you're lowering risk. And what you have is not elimination of disease, but you have mitigation of disease, and you have an improvement in your life expectancy. So I really don't want to minimize the fact that everybody needs to change today because they're going to benefit down the road. But when people say that, tennis, being a tennis player is 17 years longer life expectancy, and the trial says 15 years for vegan diet, they're really talking about lifetime exposure to sport and diet, to lifestyle issues. Okay. Can you come in as and start playing tennis at a 60-year-old and expect that you're going to get the same, 17 years? Probably not, but you're going to get some of it. And, it's hard to quantitate to exactly give you an answer, but I would say the thing to do, if you consider, everything from the planet, which we didn't talk too much about, animal rights, which we didn't talk about at all, and human health, we also just start today, and you're going to get some benefit. And yeah, I could still, I did my 20th year anniversary. There is actually a website, if you haven't seen it, where you could actually put in the search engine, your vegan calculator. I think it actually is called the vegan calculator. And it talked about the hundreds of thousands of gallons of water and the number of lives of animals I've saved. It gives you all the list of things that you've done for the planet by becoming a vegan and over a 20-year period. But I still expect that I could get cardiovascular disease, but it would be a whole lot later than it would have been if I hadn't made that change 20 years ago.